Hello, welcome back to our St. Paul Learn with the Lead. We present these hour-long programs for our community once a month. I'm Heidi Klumpkin, co-president of the League of Women Voters St. Paul and on the program committee. I'll be moderating part of tonight's presentation. We'd like to thank the St. Paul Neighborhood Network and the Suburban Community TV for broadcasting tonight's program. You can check out our YouTube site and view previous programs at any time. For over 100 years, the League of Women Voters has worked as a citizens league to improve our government and engage all citizens in the decisions affecting our lives. The League is a nonpartisan membership organization dedicated to you, our community. We study issues, we take positions, and we take action. You can check out our websites, St. Paul, Minnesota, and at the national level to learn more about membership in the League of Women Voters. We'd love to have you give us a try. We wanted to start tonight by acknowledging that we are learning today on the ancestral homeland of the Dakota and the current home of many Native nations, including the Dakota and Ojibwe. Land acknowledgement is only one small part of supporting Indigenous communities. We hope our land acknowledgement statement will inspire others to stand with us in solidarity with Native nations. For tonight's program, we have quite a few presenters. And so if you want to ask questions of the presenters, feel free to use the chat in Zoom. You can also use the Q&A bubble at the bottom of the screen. Our program is being recorded and broadcast live on Facebook. So if you're watching on Facebook, please put your questions for the speaker in the comment section. We'll get to as many as we can before the end of tonight's program. Also, we're using the Zoom, you can use the Zoom closed caption feature, so feel free to turn that on, but remember that they're not always accurate because they're auto-generated. So for tonight's program, Generation Z to the Rescue, our Youth Vote projects, I'd like to introduce the co-chairs of the League of Women Voters St. Paul Youth Vote Committee. Grace Reardon has been working with League of Women Voters St. Paul for 2.5 years and leading the youth vote for 2. She's also a member of the program committee. Leah Pack has been working with LWVSP for 2 years and leading the youth vote for, I think, the same amount of time. Grace and Leah continue to build this program by writing grants, reports for those grants, communicating with student leaders, teachers, volunteers, and many more. So I will now hand it over to Grace and Leah to give an overview of the program.
Hey everyone, thanks for coming. So we first just kind of want to talk a little bit about the model we use for the program and kind of why we work that way. So Leah, do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, so for sure, as Heidi mentioned, Grace and I started in this role as co-chairs about 1.5 to 2 years ago now. And we took over what was already a great existing program run by Dan Crivet, who I know is here tonight. And the basic model we use with our student leader program is we train high school students themselves to work in the schools. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like later on and what we've done in the past. But our focus is not just on getting young people engaged, but also training them how to get other people engaged. And Grace, hand it back to you.
Yeah, so we work with their teachers who then work to recruit students who might be interested, and we try to make the program really inclusive. So working with mostly social studies teachers, but try to make it accessible to anybody who's interested, and have students talk to their peers about voting. And a lot of our high school student leaders aren't yet eligible to vote. And so we also try to incorporate both voter registration and voter education into their projects. So why voting is important to them, how to talk to your family about voting, all those kinds of things.
And with this program, we usually work in both the fall and spring semesters. Fall obviously has a bit of a different focus because there's elections every year in St. Paul, and so they're often focused around that. And then in the spring, at that point, usually a lot more students have turned 18, maybe newly eligible to vote. So our spring programs often focus on that kind of education and preparing seniors before they go off and do their next things. And then the other crucial part of the program is all of our student leaders receive a stipend for the work they do for completing a project and working with us. And this is made possible because of the grants we get, both from Ramsey County, the National League, the State League. We have a few different sources that have been really great partners in this.
Thanks, Heidi. I think you can go to the next slide. Cool. So the title of this program talks about Generation Z. So we wanted to just define a little bit what we meant by that, and kind of compare that demographic data with some others. So baby boomers are in 2021. This is all from 2021 census data. Are 57 to 75 and account for about 22% of the US population. And then there's Generation X, 20% of the population. Millennials, which are like older than some people kind of conceptualize them as, are 26 to 44. And then Generation Z, which all of our student leaders would be considered a part of, are 11 to 25, or now I guess 12 to 26, and account for 21% of the US population. Next. So here's so there's kind of like a lot of people talk about youth voter turnout and how young people don't vote. And so we want to like push back against that a little bit and show kind of the increased trend of youth voter turnout last year, and also just talk a little bit about kind of those trends and why they might be. Last year, we had Professor Gorin from the University of Minnesota come and talk about kind of youth vote trends, and some of his comments, he found that, or, his research talked about, and his kind of knowledge about how as kind of participation of young voters goes up, voter participation and other age demographics also go up. And this graph here is showing national data, not Minnesota data. That's not available yet for this election cycle. And yeah, so this just kind of shows that it's going up, but also why, 27% isn't super high. So why we still want to like target this age group for voter turnout.
So with that as some background and motivation for why this program exists, to go back a little bit into the history of the program, the League of Women Voters St. Paul has had a youth vote committee or youth vote program in some iteration for quite some time. For a long time, they were very active in the St. Paul public school system. Our adult volunteers would go in and set up registration tables, talk to students and engage that way. And while that work's really important, what our league volunteers and committee members found was that it's a lot harder to reach students coming in as an outsider, coming in as an adult. They don't want to necessarily approach you. It's a little bit harder to engage with them. And so that was when Dan Krevitt helped with revamping the program and focusing on the student leader aspect. So training the students to do that education themselves. We also found, Grace and I both were working with the youth vote team 2 years ago in 2020, and that kind of forced the program to pivot a little bit as well, get some increased flexibility, but we also saw some great creativity come out of that. Whereas beforehand, our student leaders often were, they had a lot of creativity as already, but they were also doing some of the same activities in terms of presentations to classes and setting up registration tables at their schools. But obviously with remote learning, that was no longer possible. So we in the pandemic and since then have also encouraged more forms of virtual outreach, whether that's through social media, through emails, and messaging through like school platforms, student announcements, videos, things like that. And then just for some context, since the program has been in that kind of form and with the student leaders from 2018 to 2021, we have worked with 55 student leaders. And of those 55, 40, returned for a semester. So as I mentioned earlier, we do work both in the fall and in the spring. And so a lot of students come back, and that's something we really enjoy with the program, seeing that growth and the dedication to continue and keep putting out these important messages. And then throughout that time, we have worked with 11 of the St. Paul high schools in the area. And yeah, so that was through the end of last year. We also did a program in the spring of 2022, and of course, fall of 2022, which is the focus of this program. And next slide. So fall 2022, a bit about our student leader accomplishments. This fall, we had 5 student leaders in 4 schools. And today we have the opportunity to hear from 3 of the student leaders and also show their projects a little bit. We've also been doing a greater push for keeping track of the number of people they're interacting with. We're still waiting on some last data to come in, but we know that through all of our student leaders, they registered 12 students at their high school, at their respective high schools. And one thing they found, and we know to expect this at this point, is that a lot of students are just not eligible yet. But that doesn't mean that this work still isn't important. So we also had 15 students signed up for text reminders from the league. So this is a service that students can sign up for, where then they get texting about, hey, this election's coming up, or remember the registration deadline. And it's a pretty easy way to get that reminders back to the top of your mind. But I think what we're a big part of our focus, again, because not all students are eligible, is also just that outreach and education portion. And so through our 5 student leaders, we actually had information reach over 1,300 students in the St. Paul high school system, whether that was through an announcement they heard, or a presentation they watched, or a student leader that they talked to. We were actually talking about elections and engaging with people on it on that much broader scale, which is really exciting to see. And with that, we don't want to take too much time just talking about it. We want to let you guys hear from the students themselves. So first, we're going to welcome Betty from Como High School to talk a little bit more about her project, what she did, and so on. So Betty, if you're able to turn on your video, you can take it away.
I don't think I can turn on my video, but okay. Hello. I did my project with posters. I did it last year actually in the spring semester with a group, and I just really wanted to come back and do it again because it was really powerful and exciting to see like all your peers being interested in voting as well. So I did posters this year. I made 10 posters and hung them up around Como, with like, as you can see, there's some facts on the page, and then there's also a QR code, which I had around 150 students scan, and they would just fill out the information on the QR code to gather data for this. And then it also had some like facts and points about voting in specifically Minnesota and like the requirements and stuff. And I really noticed that there was a lot of people scanned it and wanted to fill it out, but I think they saw that like they weren't over 18 yet, so they weren't eligible to vote yet. But you could definitely see like the ambition of people who wanted to vote and would like to get out in the spring and next fall as well. So some of the data that we have here is if they're over 18, most people said no because they are not, but next year they will be and would be willing to vote and sign up. And then if they're registered to vote as well, most said no. I think also the age factor, and a lot of people, I think, including me myself, I didn't know a lot about voting before I took the senior government class this year. So I don't think a lot of people were in the loop about voting or knowing how to sign up quite yet, which also stated that in Minnesota specifically, there's same-day registration, which really allows for a lot more people to get out and vote on the same day as the voting. But as you can see, there's some people who were already registered or are 18. And I think the people who said that they were 18 also were registered to vote. So that really is good to see too. Next slide would be good. And then here are some of the responses that I got from people saying what they've learned in their government classes or just in general about what is the importance of voting. So a lot of people said that their family has talked about voting, and the importance of voting came from their family. Also through government class, I think that's a big one for a lot of students, able to learn about voting and the importance through school as well. And then, as you can see, one student said, it puts the issues we care about into political discussion, which when we can vote for candidates we support. Don't like the electoral college. When there's more info, which I hope this project put out to Como students, students are able to like learn more about voting and be able to choose their candidates based on their perspective of how to lead. The future depends on the votes. It helps them keep involved in the choices that are made in their city, and yeah, to make changes to determine future leaders of not only Minnesota, but also the US government, which is definitely big. And then learning about the issues and the things candidates will do for the state or even as locally as communities, and Como too, just the Como community all around. So I think this really helped a lot of students like understand what voting would do, and then also what they already knew, the background information they already knew before.
Thanks for sharing, Betty. And remember, if you have questions for Betty or anyone else, please put them in the chat and we'll have time to go through them at the end. Next, I'll invite two of our other student leaders who work together, Maggie and Delaney, to come and talk a little bit about their project. Yeah, so if you two are able to turn your videos on. Maggie and Delaney worked at Central High School together this fall.
Hi, I'm Maggie. I'm not sure if Delaney is in the car still or not.
I'm home. Hi, I'm Delaney.
Okay. Yeah, so I decided to like be a part of this project and stuff because I've been interested in politics for a while, and I am recently 18, so I was able to vote and I wanted to learn more as a young voter, and I also wanted to share that knowledge with other people. So yeah, that's why I decided to be a part of this. Delaney.
Sorry. Yeah, my mom's an election judge and I student election judged with Maggie this year. So politics are like a big thing in my family. And I knew a lot of my friends that were turning 18 didn't really know a whole lot about the candidates or like how to register to vote. So I thought it would be fun to learn more about.
Yeah, but so for our project, we did a poster board and we spoke to students at lunches. And so for the poster board, we did a lot of information about like what was on the ballot, eligibility, how to register, as well as like what some of the candidates stood for. And so I decided to talk about the candidates for governor. And I took information directly from their websites and other nonpartisan sites in order to learn more about exactly what they wanted to say on a few different issues. And yeah, I also included like a sample ballot so that people could see what they would be looking at if they were 18 and ready to vote. But yeah, I also spoke directly to a few different students about the registration process, and they ended up voting. And yeah.
I was really interested in the impact section of our project and how a lot of young people are eligible to vote, but don't vote because they're uneducated. So it was fun to like talk to people at the lunches, even though people were mostly not like 18, we still like talked to them about making sure that their parents vote and like they know how to vote, and talking to students who were freshly 18. So yeah. Wait, hold on, sorry. We reached a lot of people and we like walked around the lunchrooms and made sure everybody came over and saw our board and stuff. So I feel like we reached a good number of people.
Yeah, and then like generally for takeaways that I had from this project, I learned a lot. It was super helpful for me, and learning about how I could register and everything. And I also learned a lot about the candidates I did research on. So I was happy that I included that in the project to provide that for other students who were 18 as well. But yeah, so just generally, I think it taught me a lot, and I was really excited to share what I learned with the other kids at our school.
Yeah, I feel the same way about everything. It was cool to learn like the registering process and then like applying that when I was registering people to vote on election day. And now like I know what to do when I'm 18 next year. But yeah, it was all really helpful, and it was cool to like reach people and have people say, okay, like I'll tell my mom like this, or like now I know what to do. So yeah.
Great. Thank you both for your project and for coming and speaking with us. Again, anybody put questions in the chat. And at this point, we can go on to the next slides where we have some images from Faith. Faith was unable to join us tonight at the last minute, but she did a project at Highland Park High School. And Faith worked on, she did two kind of components of her project, Maggie and Delaney, she did a voiceover over the announcements and talked about making sure people knew when election day was coming up and that they could do same-day registration. But she also created this Instagram account that you can see on the right, talking about voting and different information put out that way about election day, what you need to bring to the polls, sample ballot, some of those kinds of background information, how to find a polling place, things like that. And then she promoted it. She had it as a separate account, but she also promoted it herself, and was able to, through that, kind of see how many people she could reach, especially with Instagram. There's like a stories function, so you can see how many people looked at your slides. So she found that she had her announcement, but then also reached quite a few people through that Instagram method, and then also was able to sign people up for those election reminders that we talked about earlier. So as you can see, there's kind of a range of projects. We like to let our students pick something in a format that is interesting to them or that they think would work well. So that's how we end up with this variety, which is always really fun to see at the end of the semester. And yeah, with that, that's a bit of an overview of the project. So we'll turn it over to question and answer, and we'll let people think for a little bit and put them in the chat. And then we all, Grace and I, have some questions just for the student leaders as well. Grace, do you want to get started?
Yeah, sure. So if everyone wants to come off camera, if you are able and want to, yeah. So the first question that we have And I feel like you answered the first one. You all answered the first one. So I'll go with number 2. What was your process to come up with your project? Maggie and Delaney, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. We are visual learners, so we're like, let's make a poster board, something easy that people can read. And we thought it was really impactful, like when other people come and talk to us at school and like tell us about things that they're interested in. So we figured that would be the best way to go about it.
And then for my project, also in visual learners, and I always see posters around the school as well. And I see a lot of people stopping and looking at them, especially if they're like, if they look interesting, you'll stop and look at them after school activities or whatever it may be. So definitely thought that posters would be a good way to like get the word out around the school.
Cool, thanks. Leah, do you want to do the ones that
Yeah.
Participants have sent in?
For sure. So we have a question that is asking how we use social media to reach students and what platforms. So I think that's probably one a little bit more for Grace and I, because we've had that more in the past. Students often work with Instagram and they put out information and then share it with their friends that way and engage. As Faith had a project mentioning that. But also if any of the students, if you guys want to talk about in general how you see like your peers using social media, or if you do you feel like you've seen things about like the election on your own social media, and do you feel like that's like effective? Do you think, I know sometimes it feels like there's too much, but just what are your perspectives on that? If any of you want to start.
My audio isn't working.
Oh, okay.
You can go. Then we can go.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like generally social media is like super impactful, and almost everybody I know uses it to some extent, and they engage with it pretty much daily, if not, like multiple times daily. And I think it's just like a really effective way to reach younger people, since that's something that's very young person specific, as compared to other platforms. So specifically things like Instagram, for example, I know very many people use that and engage with it all the time. And so I personally have seen some things like before the election surrounding registration information and stuff. And I felt like that was really helpful.
I think Instagram is really like impactful, and I know I repost stuff that I want people to see. And yeah, especially like this election, I saw a lot of stuff going around, like information on like where to vote and like how to register and like the candidates and stuff. So I think it's really a good resource.
Also, I think I saw a lot about, because I know they redistrict, so polling places got moved, and about the voter for the younger generation, it was like very high last year as well. So I think I saw a lot right before the election, which definitely like at least gave people information, but also if you're over 18 eligible to vote, definitely got more information about how to do so.
Yeah, for sure. Grace, do you wanna?
Cool. Yeah, thank you all for answering that one. Okay, you are asked, are any of you interested or planning a career in politics? Or would you consider running for office?
So I am interested in some aspects of politics, and I'm interested in doing work in environmental science for my major. And so I think I would be interested in being a political advocate, but I don't know if I would directly run for office.
I'm kind of with Maggie there. I'm like, I love politics and I love learning about it, but I don't know if I could be a politician or have a career in politics. But I would love to be a citizen in democracy. And I'm planning on election judging again. So I feel like that's my extent of a career in politics.
I agree. I definitely am interested in it, and I think educating others is a really good idea and will continue to do so, but I don't think I will become a politician or anything like that.
Well, I'm sure everyone here wishes you all well in those careers wherever they end up going. Grace, I also don't know if you want to answer this question. Grace kind of
I
is
consider running
Grace
for
is
office.
working.
No, I don't think I would consider. I've thought about it in the past. I don't think it's for me.
Yeah. Very fair. We also have a question asking if there's any help you would like from non-Gen Z adults. And I know I would say, as a plug for the Youth Vote Committee, definitely talk to high school students about the league and about the work we do and see if they're interested in our program. But I would also like to ask the students more broadly, do you think there are specific things adults can be doing to help people in your age get engaged?
Yeah, I think generally adults just talking about them voting and politics and bringing awareness to kids and involving kids in the voting process is really important. Like I grew up going to polling places with my parents to vote, so I kind of knew what it looked like going in, and I think that helped me a lot, like when it came to being interested in voting myself, and I felt more impacted by the fact that my parents like brought me through that process. And so I think parents bringing their kids is like a super important part of that.
Yeah, I think like I can't think of anything specific that adults could do, but like leading by example, I guess. And like my parents are really like stress the importance of voting and stuff. So I feel like if every adult just stresses that, then I don't know, people will vote and know how important it is.
I agree too. I think even if you're not surrounded by adults who necessarily vote or really know like how to vote yet or anything, definitely think you can find someone, even if that's like a teacher at your school, in history classes or anything, that will know the importance of voting. And yeah, I think if everyone could just talk about voting, especially when it comes near the time, more younger generation will be interested in voting.
Okay, we also got a question about being an election judge, and the viewer was wondering, for those of you who've done it, what was good and bad about that experience, and were there any like barriers to participating? I'll just talk a little bit about your experience with that.
Yeah, so where should I start? I really liked it. I didn't really have any downsides. I mean, the only thing was kind of like being bummed out that I couldn't vote, but
oh, also, do you want to say, I don't know if everyone knows like what being an election judge like is.
Oh yeah, for sure. Basically we register new voters, we sign people in for voting, we like tell them how to fill out the ballots and feed it into the machine thing, and yeah, just like all the technical stuff. But I had a lot of fun. I didn't really have any like, just, I don't know, it was a learning experience, I guess. So it was just all new, and like just dealing with people who are like upset with how things, I don't know. That's like the only thing that I ran into, was people being like annoyed at the process.
I was also
Oh, sorry, you can go.
I was also one this year, and I think it was a really good experience. And it was really cool to see like the behind the scenes of voting and how you're registered and the process of it. And just learning all of that, now I feel like when I am eligible to vote, I'll understand it better and be able to tell people more about it.
I also had a really positive experience, and I really liked being able to work with voters. And as Lainey said, we did a range of different jobs, but my favorite was definitely working directly with people and helping them figure out exactly what they're supposed to be doing. But yeah, generally it was really positive, and I really enjoyed it. And if I end up being here on election day again, I would love to do it again.
Well, yeah, and thank you all for doing that. It's super important work as well. We have a question, Delaney and Maggie, you talked about using nonpartisan sources on your board, and also for Betty, of course. This is something for those who don't know, with the Youth Vote program, as the league is nonpartisan, we require all of our students and their student projects to be nonpartisan in their capacity working with the league. So they all sign nonpartisan agreements, basically agreeing to that while their project is being completed and in the contents of their project. But do you all feel like that concept of nonpartisan is like familiar? Was it familiar to you? Do you think like if you're talking to your peers about information being nonpartisan, do you think that's known by students?
I think that there's a general understanding of what it means to be nonpartisan. And when students didn't exactly understand what I meant by that, when I was talking to them about stuff, I would explain that quickly. But I think that generally students did have an idea of what the concept was.
Yeah, and I think like mostly since our audience was younger, it wasn't like necessarily them asking us which candidates, like whatever, like trying to get us to be nonpartisan. It was mostly just like the idea of how to vote. So we didn't really run into a lot of issues with that.
Yeah, I didn't run into many issues about that either, but I think in your government classes too, we really talk about like voting and stuff, and I think a lot of people knew already what it meant, and if they didn't, they would just ask, and I would definitely tell them, but I didn't have any information that would run into that circumstance.
Okay, this next question is sort of for Leah and I think, but Maggie, Delaney, Betty, if you have any thoughts as well, I would love to hear them. What strategies do we use, and how do we reach students of color? So I can just start, and then Leah, if you want to like add on. This is definitely something we think about and talk about and want to get better about, although we do consistently have like between like, Leah, would you say like 20 to 50% of our student leaders are students of color, depending on the semester?
Yeah, and it would be, I guess, 20% this fall.
Yeah, it would be 20% this year. I think, one thing that's really important is trying to reach as many high schools as possible. We also, paying students is another thing that's really important to increasing the diversity of student leaders. And then, when you increase the diversity of student leaders, you also like increase who they're reaching and who they're talking to. And then I think the other thing, and this is less about like student leader recruitment, but we also like encourage students who speak other languages to translate voter education information. And we had some really cool projects, especially around the census a couple years ago, where students translated like census information and shared that within not only their school community, but their like broader communities as well. Leah, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely think this is something we've talked about as a youth vote committee, and also in the broader League of Women Voters St. Paul. And I think, to echo what Grace said, our program has historically done pretty well, I would say, in terms of having, like Grace said, 20 to 50% of our student leaders being students of color. And we also definitely, when we're doing outreach in the schools or talking to teachers to recruit students, that's something we talk about. And I think in general, our youth vote work is probably more representative of St. Paul's population than our other league work. So that's something we're definitely thinking about. And I also think there is an important like a distinction to be made between like representation and tokenization. So we don't want to just like have student leaders of color to say we have it. It's like, okay, but what does that mean and why is that important? And so in our outreach, that's something we have a mind on, but we're not like, okay, what's this quota we can fill, because that's not doing anybody any good either. So like Grace said, we're constantly thinking about this, but it also involves efforts like the payment as an equity is super important for equity and other aspects like that. And the getting in all the schools, all of those things.
Are we answering this one too? Just make sure.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry.
Okay.
If you guys want to, yeah, I don't know if you had specific thoughts in terms of what you've observed in your schools or when you're doing your projects for sure, but also no pressure to if you don't want to.
So I think me and Maggie noticed like, so Central is really diverse. So like just us outreaching to everyone, I feel like we reached people of color and students of color. But I know like I had specific like instances where I would be talking to my friends who are people of color, and like when I bring up like the money and like the like getting paid, they were definitely a lot more interested. So like I got more people like interested, and like I don't know. I feel like that's a really good tool, I guess.
With my posters, I mean, they were hung up around the school, so Como was also very diverse. So everyone could have seen them, and also I could see like the responses that I got. And I know a lot are students of color, which is really good to see. And just anyone who ever has questions or wants to also join, I had a couple of people ask about the program as well, and they were interested in joining. And I think it's really good to get their voice heard and this program expanded throughout the school.
Yeah, I think conducting our project in a general space, everybody has lunch, and that's where we presented our information. And so I think that was kind of one of the ways that we tried to reach everybody, instead of doing it in specific classes or anything, because you know, some people take different classes than others. And so in order to achieve like the greatest level of equity possible, we wanted to do it in a space where everyone went through that space and had the opportunity to speak with us.
Yeah, thank you for your insight there. We have a question about someone in the audience noticed that all of your projects also included information about what was on the ballot and not just that election day was approaching. Why do you think that information is also important to include the who's on the ballot and what is on the ballot?
I think it's really important because it's like a lot of people get overwhelmed going voting, especially if it's their first time. And like seeing like the firsthand experience of being an election judge, a lot of people were asking questions like, what does this mean? What does this mean? And they kept coming back and they didn't know. So we thought it was really important to include on our presentation, like the specifics, so you know exactly what you're getting into.
Also definitely just like educating, if they don't know about voting in the first place, they won't know much about the candidates or anything that will be on the ballot. So I think educating them on that is really important, so they know what voting is and what they're voting for and what it really means. So I think it's good to have them know before they end up voting or talk to other like their parents or anything about registering to vote.
Yeah, I think that having specific examples of different things that candidates were advocating for was really helpful too, because it allowed for students to really make up their own minds based on what they saw in what those candidates were interested in. So I think that was a really beneficial aspect of it.
Okay, here's another one. And Heidi, let me know how we're doing on time, or like how many questions we should do. But we're asked, were teachers involved this year? And then if any of you want to speak a little bit about like how your teacher supported you, or how your school supported you in the project.
Yeah, and I can start just generally from the committee perspective. We often have had close partnerships with teachers in the past, and we do really treasure those. Those are really important to the work we do. I think this fall, most of our relationship with the teachers, as always, is we really depend on them for recruitment. So Betty had done this program before, so she had kind of a different in, but for most of our students, it involves us reaching out to teachers we know. This year, we also had teachers who hadn't been previously connected with the program reach out to us. And so we started forming those connections. And then they help identify students who might be a good fit, help us advertise in their school for the program. But if the students also want to talk a little bit about, did you end up working much with the teachers? Were you more independent?
So for our project, we didn't really work with our teacher, but she was super supportive in the process, and she was encouraging about it. And at first I wasn't sure if I was totally down for this project, and she totally encouraged me and reinforced the idea that I should be a part of this. And I'm really glad that she did, because I learned a lot. But yeah, generally she was just super supportive.
Yeah, and to add on to that, our school is super supportive of our project, and they let us set up a table and chairs and like go in the lunchroom and stay through some of our classes so we could reach everyone in all different lunches.
I worked with Dan a little bit, just making sure I had everything right. But otherwise it was mostly independent this time. But still, I worked with my history teacher, like to get in the information, where to hang up posters and stuff. But otherwise, it was independent this time.
Okay, Heidi, let me know that we have time for one more question. So a couple options. So either is there like a funny story or anecdote you want to share from your project? Or is there anything else that you want to share that we haven't asked yet? Yeah, and if you don't have anything, that's okay too.
Me and Maggie had a fun little run-in. So we accidentally took like the Army's table in the lunchroom, you know how like set up in Canvas. So we ended up educating each other on like each other's boards and stuff, and that was really funny because they're patriotic, so they kind of knew how to vote, but they were still really interested in our project and gave us pens.
Nothing really funny happened, but I had some people come up to me after they filled out the QR code, and they were also interested in the program, which I think was really cool to reach more people who can work on it next semester in the spring as well.
Great. Well, thank you all for sharing, and thank you for working with us. We'll turn it back over to Heidi.
Yeah, thank you all so much. This was so wonderful. I do have a few more slides that I'm going to share. I have to find the button on my screen. Sorry. Well, thank you so much for being here. I really want to send a thank you so much to Grace and Leah and Delaney and Maggie and Betty for doing the work this semester and for reaching, oh my gosh, those stats of how many students you reached is really incredible. So thank you so much for your time and your work and for sharing it with us today. I also wanted to make sure to thank our broadcast partners, SPNN and SCCTV for sharing this information, but also the League of Women Voters Roseville for always sharing our upcoming events. We really appreciate your work as well. So we appreciate the many volunteers, speakers, and supporters that help make our St. Paul Learn with the League program so successful. So I really appreciate our program committee and all of you attendees here tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. We do have another program scheduled coming up in January called Welcoming the Dear Neighbor. It is featuring the folks from St. Thomas who partnered with Mapping Prejudice to talk about the expansion of that program into Ramsey County and some of the long-term effects that racial housing covenants have on cities like St. Paul or counties like Ramsey. So we look forward to seeing you in January, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. Appreciate y'all.